Greetings and welcome. Many people have asked me in the past, and that list also includes the names of some academic philosophers, not original philosophical geniuses, but professors of philosophy who are not exactly philosophers, but they teach philosophy. Many have asked me two questions. One, what did Jesus mean by saying that you should love your enemies? Number two, is it possible at all to love one's enemies? As you would readily recall, the reference is, of course, to the 33rd, 43rd and 44th verse of the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, which is part of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, and let me quote from memory, "You have heard this said by them of old times, love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This is the text. And this teaching is something that actually shocks those who hear it, especially those who are sincere about what they hear. If one is used to hearing this text in a very kind of indifferent, nonchalant, habitual manner, then these words will have no impact. But a person who, especially from another faith, hears this with some attention and respect, and therefore comes into some kind of contact with the ambit of its meaning, experiences a kind of inward jolt. Hence the question, is it possible at all to love one's enemies? One can understand that an effort is made to love one's neighbor, one's brother, one's sister, members of one's family. As for loving one's enemies and loving those who revile you and persecute you, it's a different proposition altogether. This goes quite past the scope of worldly imagination and the range of possibilities endorsed by common consent. Therefore, in the past, many people have asked me this question, which of course encouraged me to think and think deep. The substance of the video comprises the insights that have spontaneously emerged from those silent ruminations or meditations. Now, first let us ask the question, is it possible to love one's enemies or one's enemy? I have to say that it's eminently possible because that is what you and I do all the time, except that we don't really understand the meaning of the word enemy. We have our own notions about who our enemies are, and within that, gradations as to who is enemy number one, enemy number two, enemy number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The list, of course, may be long, in some cases interminable. But that's not Jesus' idea of enmity or who your enemy is. First of all, we have to understand who our real enemy is. That's the starting point of our reflection together. From my experience, and if you permit me to be candid, brutally candid, I have to say that my foremost enemy, the enemy who has done maximum damage to myself, the enemy at whose hands I suffered most, all these 75 years that I have walked on the face of the earth. Make a guess. That enemy number one, enemy numero uno, has been myself. I have been, truth to tell, my own worst enemy. No enemy I have encountered other than myself has done as much damage, as much harm, as much injustice to me as I have done to myself. And therefore, in all honesty, I count myself, I deem myself my worst enemy. I don't know how you view the situation. And strangely enough, I have absolutely no problem in loving that enemy. In fact, I'm a natural and spontaneous, indeed irresistible love with that enemy of mine. I wish I had the wisdom and the discernment to recognize this enemy when it mattered most and when it would have made a big difference in my life. But it took me a long time, a long day's walk into the night, as the title of one of Eugene O'Neill's plays suggests, to realize that I am my own worst enemy. So, as regards the first question, is it possible at all to love one's enemy? I have to say, surprising as this might sound in the ears of many, is that that's what we do all the time. We are in love with our worst, most deadly enemy, that's ourselves. Now, why should we love our enemy? There is a very, very good, healthy reason for it, a spiritual reason for it. Loving one's enemy, for all practical purposes, involves loving oneself. If you love yourself, what happens? You will love your neighbor. That is the second commandment, second of the two cardinal commandments. The first of the two cardinal commandments is love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your strength. The second is like unto the first, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, look at the second commandment a little attentively. It very clearly states, very explicitly implies that you can love your neighbor only if you love yourself. Most people find it difficult to love their neighbor simply because they despise themselves. It stands to reason that a person who despises himself or herself cannot sincerely love anyone. And because most people in this world live inwardly and secretly tormented by self-revulsion, they find it impossible to love anyone else sincerely. Many people, of course, pretend that they love X, Y, or Z. But in reality, they don't love anyone because in them, the capacity to love is seriously crippled because they live in a state of perpetual self-revulsion. They hate themselves. They despise themselves. Like in the case of charity, which must begin at home, love also must begin at home. And as far as every individual in this world is concerned, the primary home is oneself. So love must begin with oneself. Love yourself. This is not the occasion for me to give a detailed explanation of what it means to love oneself, but I may give only a very, very brief clue. To love is, in a practical sense, in a very meaningful and creative sense, to love is to continually enhance the worth of. If I love my children, if I love my wife, if I was a teacher, if I love my students, I will sincerely endeavor to the best of my capacity, to the last drop of my energy, to continually enhance their worth. That's the function of love. That's the work of love, as Soren Kierkegaard would say. So, when I love myself, what happens? I'll continuously enhance my worth. I'll grow to my full potential. Only then will I be able to love my neighbor. Loving is not easy. Loving is just about the most difficult thing in the world. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of large-heartedness, a lot of personal stature and greatness to really love others. To love is to give liberally of oneself. But if one is empty, or one is in a state of negativity, which is indicated by the state of self-revulsion, self-denigration, cynicism about oneself, feeling awkward about oneself. How can one give love to anybody else? How can one love anybody else, including those who are supposed to be dear and near to oneself? And this problem has now erupted like a volcano, particularly in Kerala, where in recent times many suicide instances have come to light, the prime cause of which is the incapacity to love one's own wife and children, driving them to suicide. Now, these things are in the public knowledge, and therefore I don't have to give further details or further explanations. So let's fix this very clearly in our mind. Two insights I have argued so far. First, we are our own worst enemies. We have a duty to love our enemies, therefore we have to love ourselves. And when we love ourselves, we try to, there's no option but to do all in our powers to increase our worth. And the only way to increase our worth is to grow in respect to all our potentialities and possibilities. And growth takes us to a stage where, like in the case of nature, when a tree grows to a certain extent, it begins to produce fruit. That's what Jesus says, abide in me and I in you. In that case, you'll produce much fruit. Now, what Jesus is saying is that if you abide in me and I in you, you will grow and grow and grow and reach a stage of your growth in which you will begin to produce fruit. And Jesus says a tree must be known by its fruit. So, when you love yourself, you begin to grow. And the proof of your growth is that you're able to love your neighbor. There's no other way you can love your neighbor. And when you begin to love your neighbor, you realize that your love for your neighbor, your love for yourself, your love for everybody, your neighbor, as again Soren Kierkegaard explains beautifully, loving one's neighbor means loving without any discrimination. Because neighbor is a neutral category. Neighbor is a concept which does not bear any labels of discrimination. Your neighbor may be a woman, a man, an old person, young person, a Hindu, a Muslim, an agnostic, an unbeliever, a drunkard, a prostitute. It could be anyone. You're under obligation, you're under divine obligation to love your neighbor. And in that state and in that state alone, will you be really able to know that you love God. There's no other proof. The real proof that you love God or you care for God at all or you're a believer is that you are able to love your neighbor. Now, when you love or when you develop the capacity to love your neighbor, what happens is that you overcome the challenge of enmity. On the other hand, if you don't have the capacity to love your neighbor, your neighbor becomes your second enemy. Your first enemy is yourself. Your neighbor becomes your second enemy. And at home, your second neighbor is your wife, your children. And therefore, in many homes, there's absolutely no love lost between members of the family. It's not that there are fights between homes or families. It's that there are fights, regular fights within homes, intrafamilial tensions and traumas. All these indicate an all-round failure of love. And therefore, the meaning of Jesus' teaching is that all of us have a basic need and a fundamental duty to develop ourselves. And the only way to develop ourselves is to fall in love with ourselves, which is not narcissism. Please don't mistake one for the other. Loving oneself in a manner that facilitates or results in the development of one's full potential is not narcissism, it is spirituality. Loving oneself as an end in itself, resulting in the severance of one's contacts with others and the limitation of one's social consciousness and imagination, that is narcissism, in which one lives only for oneself. And when one lives only for oneself, one becomes a source of trauma, hurt, and humiliation for others. Whereas when one develops oneself in respect to all talents, potentialities, and possibilities, one becomes a blessing to others. There's a difference between narcissism, self-love, which is narcissistic, and self-love, which is spiritual. One is just the opposite of the other. So when you love yourself, you grow, and the proof of your growth is that you develop the capacity to love your neighbor, and loving your neighbor is a very liberating experience. And then you realize that you truly, in spirit and in truth, you love God as well. And in this context, I'm reminded of an old Chinese proverb which says, if there is light in your soul, there will be love in your relationships. If there is love in your relationships, there will be harmony at home. If there is harmony at home, there will be law and order in the society. And if there is law and order in the society, there will be peace in the world. That's a beautiful concept. So it all begins with you. It all begins with me. Hence also this old saying, charity must begin at home. I'm reminded of the great preacher D.L. Moody, who was once asked the question as to what the person who asked him, as to what he should do to bring about a revival, spiritual revival in the world. His advice was very interesting. He said, take a piece of chalk, stand somewhere and draw a circle around yourself. Stand there, close your eyes and pray. God, send renewal to everything within this circle. That is to say, revival, renewal must begin with oneself. That's why Jesus proclaimed right at the beginning of his public ministry, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. Every meaningful change must begin with myself, with oneself. But that's not how the world sees it. When religion becomes a worldly thing, the agenda is not to change oneself. The agenda is not to repent and be reborn, be born again. The agenda is to go and convert everybody else. It's the most regenerate and the most unconverted that undertakes this business of converting everybody else in order to convert the so-called conversion of others into dollar and Deutsche Mark and pound sterling, etc. It's the most repugnant thing I can think of. Whereas the only spiritual thing is to change oneself, but that's just about the most difficult thing. Change is the greatest challenge as far as human beings are concerned. But as Mahatma Gandhi said, if there is a genuine stirring of the spirit, the world around cannot remain indifferent to it. So if I can change and become the change that I want to see all around, then rest assured, sooner or later, indeed sooner than later, there will be a beginning towards a better scheme of things. So this teaching is very fundamental. Love your enemies. And let me quote that text again. Matthew chapter 5, verses 43, 44. You have heard this said by them of old times. Love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Do you really think it's possible? Jesus would have never suggested this if he had entertained the slightest doubt as to the plausibility or the practicality of this approach. And Jesus certainly would not have suggested this if he had even by mistake deemed it negotiable or superfluous. This is so fundamental, and the good thing is it's also doable. And that is, in my understanding, what Jesus meant by saying, love your enemies. And then indeed you will realize that enmity is a fiction. The only reality is love. And enmity, as Soren Kierkegaard quite rightly and aptly put it, enmity is nothing but ruined love. I repeat, enmity is nothing but ruined love. Love is the primary force. Enmity results from the ruination, the corruption, the spoiling of love. So, Jesus says, stay rooted in love. And no matter what the provocation, do not abjure love. Enmity, as far as the world is concerned, is the most compelling pressure and invitation to take leave of love. If someone deems himself and behaves himself like your enemy, then you feel obliged to behave as though you are his or her enemy. Jesus says, no, no matter what happens, no matter how the world around you is disposed, do not vacate the foundation of love, for God is love. And as Paul writes to Corinthians in the first letter, chapter 13, verse 8, love never fails. And let me close this series of thoughts by recommending Soren Kierkegaard's most wonderful book, a book that influenced me to a large extent in the formative years of my life. That book is beautifully titled The Works of Love. The Works, W-O-R-K-S, Works of Love by Soren Kierkegaard. Just Google this book, you get it free, read it. It makes absorbing, fascinating, stimulating, inspiring, enlightening reading. All the very best. See you soon.